All right, as I mentioned, time to talk a little bit about some of the history of the lignite industry. For that, Dean Moos is here. Dean is the Director of Reclamation and Abandoned Mine Lines, the Abandoned Mines Lands Division with the Public Service Commission. Dean, thanks for joining us on Energy Matters. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on.
What should we know about the history of the lignite industry?
Well, lignite's played an important part of our state's history. It's been here since the frontier period early on, and it's still here today, and it's an important part of our state's economy.
It's amazing. If we could hover over North Dakota and look where there has been mining before, much of that area we wouldn't know it, right? We would, to the naked eye, you wouldn't know.
That's correct. Now, present law, we have reclamation requirements, and the land is restored back to its pre-mine condition. But some of the early mining, there weren't those requirements on it.
So, what do you see when you see those? What does that land look like today?
It's a lot of that is spoil piles. There's no soil. There was no soil salvage requirements. There was no requirements to level it or revegetate the area. So basically, you see just bare spoil, or in some instances where there was underground mining, which there was a lot in the state early on, was underground mining. You see subsidence. You see sinkholes developing, and certainly affecting the utility of that land.
And so it's a good reminder on why we do what we do now, right? And
that's correct.
And do it as well. I always love that story of, the lake. You not only reclaimed some land, but you added back in an actual lake. That's pretty phenomenal to know the kind of things that can be done now, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Now, how about on the mine side? You have an abandoned mine lands division in North Dakota. Are there a lot of abandoned mines in North Dakota?
Yeah, there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of abandoned underground mines. Some are relatively small, less than an acre in size, up to hundreds of acres in size. And the Public Service Commission has a program which addresses reclamation of elimination of the hazards associated with those, whether it be a high wall or subsidence features, and it has to be a hazard to the public. And how that program is funded, it's through a tax that's collected on coal that's being mined today. So the present-day mining is paying for the elimination of these hazards. And every year, Public Service Commission selects several projects, usually at least one surface and one underground. And again, it's elimination of a hazard, whether it be a high wall next to a public road or residence or a shop that's been undermined and is starting to subside. That elimination of those hazards.
So, what is the danger of an abandoned mine? What kinds of things are the ones you're obviously important enough to try and tackle these one by one? But if you didn't do it, what's the danger?
Well, again, if you had a high wall next to a public road, somebody could go off the road and over the high wall, or kids using the old swimming hole, and some of these there's hidden dangers, rocks in there if they're diving in, and those types of things. Subsidence, there's always the danger of somebody falling in, and that has happened. Vehicles have fallen in, farm equipment. Or you could have structural damage to a house or a shop, something like that. So there's lots of potential dangers.
So I know we're talking about a history in the industry, the lignite industry, that goes back literally to Custer, right?
Correct. Yeah, General Custer figures in our very first commercial mine in the state. In 1872, two early Bismarck residents decided they would mine coal in Morton, present-day Morton County near Sims, and they were escorted out to the site by Custer and his troops, and they started development of the mine, and they were repeatedly attacked by the Indians, and eventually abandoned the site and sold it to the Northern Pacific Railroad, and the Northern Pacific Railroad developed the site. In 1882, they began actual commercial mining of the site. It was known as the baby mine, and it provided coal for their locomotives.
That's unbelievable, really, when you think about it, isn't it? And what kind of equipment do they have? I mean, when they just say, "Oh, we're going to mine," I mean, how in the world did they do it?
The early mines were it was a lot of hand labor, but it wasn't long. By the 1890s, it was still predominantly underground mining, but electricity came into being, and commercial mine equipment became available, and the mines quickly mechanized, and all the larger mines were mechanized by 1900, even though they were still underground. And then what led to the next big phase was the surface mining, and that began about 1910 or so, and what was the impetus for that was the depletion of the Panama Canal. All these steam shovels that were used on the Panama Canal were disassembled and shipped north, and North Dakota's coal fields were well suited for surface coal mining. They're relatively level, shallow, overburdened, unconsolidated materials above the coal, so the surface mining soon outpaced the underground mines. And by 1930, there was just a gradual decline in mine production, and it continued on into the 1960s. And then 1966 saw the start of the large regional power distribution and mines that were needed to support that, and that continued right on into the early 1980s, and gives us the industry that we have today.
Very interesting, really is. And I think it's safe to say you'd have been in your position as Director of Reclamation and Abandoned Mine Lands Division at the Public Service Commission a little bit busier back then, right?
Yeah, it was. The early days were really busy times. It continues to this day. But you know, at the start of the program, we had to have a program that was in place that was as effective as the federal rules. Actually, North Dakota rules and regulations, law and regulations predate the federal law and rules. North Dakota's had reclamation requirements since 1969. The federal requirements came into place in 1979, so we predate them by 10 years.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, well, a fascinating discussion nonetheless, and before I let you go, I do want you to give, just for folks that aren't familiar, how different it is today. I mean, is this a well-oiled machine? When I say this, the industry in
yes,
knowing where the lines are, if you will.
Right. The industry, knows what their responsibilities are and what our program requirements are, and we have a pretty good working relationship with the industry and with all the various landowner and other stakeholder groups, and the mines are very proud of the work they do, and it shows in their work.
That's great. Well, interesting story, Dean. Fascinating history, too. Thanks so much for the time.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
You met Dean Moos is the Director of Reclamation and Abandoned Mine Lands Division of the Public Service Commission, and talking a little bit about the lignite industry, the history in North Dakota going back to Custer, literally, where he's part of the security to get some mining done. Pretty fascinating.